$3, Abel said, pushing the drainage map across the table with 2 fingers. Then give the girl the dry creek. It hasn't carried a bucket since her father was alive. He let the parcel key fall beside Hester's 3 coins. The words came out with the care a man used, clearing grit from his boot. Tomas Soria had been 9 days in the ground. Around the pine table his estate was divided among the living. Abel took cottonwood flat, dark soil, cottonwood shade, and the shallow well that had never once run dry. Silas took the mesquite bench and a share of the ditch. To Luz, 16, and Orphaned, fell a rock-choked ravine the survey called only seasonal drainage, reached by a footpath a mule would refuse. Luz asked whether she could still draw from her father's well. Abel said the well stood inside his line now. He allowed her a footpath across one corner of the flat. You wanted land, he said, eyes on the papers. You can still carry laundry for Hester. She signed without a word. Before she rose, she set her father's brass plumb bob on a faint crescent inked at the ravine's bend. The cord fell across an old pencil stroke none of the men noticed. Hester Quillen pressed both hands flat against the table. One of them was trembling, and she held it down so it would not show. Ansel Pike, the storekeeper, gathered his ledger and left. He had come to make sure Tomas Soria's debts were counted, and they were. $18.45 still stood against the name. Somebody would carry it now. Silas rose before Abel had finished squaring the estate papers into a stack. He went out into the yard and did not look back through the door. Outside, the afternoon lay white and hard over Dry Lantern Basin. Luz folded the map along its old creases and slid it inside her father's notebook. She did not argue for the well. She did not ask Abel to look at her. Hester walked with her to where Morrow, the family mare, stood tied in the shade of the store. You spent everything, Hester said. She was 43, a widow, a freighter and laundress who had known Luz's mother longer than Luz had been alive. Every coin you saved sewing and washing on a ditch that holds nothing but heat. He marked it twice, Luz said. Who did? My father. Luz put her hand on the mare's neck. Once when I was small, once on that map in pencil, before anyone thought to look. Hester studied her. She had carried Luz's anger before, in the store, when Abel would not meet the girl's eyes, and she would carry it again. But she had learned not to spend it where it would do no work. Then we'll go and see what he marked, Hester said. They led Morrow out of the settlement that afternoon, $3 poorer and one ravine richer, down the footpath toward the place the basin had begun to call Empty Cup. The wash cut deep and jagged through pale limestone and cemented gravel. Nothing green stood in it. At noon, the exposed rock threw back the sun hard enough to make a person squint. A cattleman named Jory Mellon had named it before the sale even closed, and the name had already spread. A creek without water, he liked to say, is only a grave with banks. Luz did not answer men like Jory. She walked the wash instead. Near the bottom stood a survey shed her father had left half-built and abandoned, its roof caved to one corner. Inside, under a fallen board, she found what the estate sale had missed because no one had thought it worth taking, a braided-sounding line, oiled and coiled, a narrow limestone chisel wrapped in cloth, 3 wooden stakes cut with old depth marks, and a field notebook, most of its pages ruined to gray pulp by rain that had come in through the broken roof. Luz turned the pages by their dry edges until she found one that had survived. A cross-section of the wash, drawn in her father's careful hand, the banks, a throat of rounded gravel, and beneath it a dark hollow he had shaded with the side of his pencil. Above the sketch, one line still legible. A wash takes water twice. The eye sees only the first. She read it aloud to Hester. Meaning what? Hester said. The storm water you can see. It comes and it goes. Luz touched the shaded hollow. And the water it leaves under the gravel that no one sees. He taught me that. He learned it from the man who taught him. The man had a name, Cesario Montoya, a Sonoran well sinker who had employed her father when her father was young. Luz had never met him. She had only her father's memory of him and the 3 sayings her father had repeated until she knew them the way she knew her own hands. Stone holds only when water has somewhere else to go. Never trust clear water until you know what stands above it. A hidden mistake still belongs to the builder. And one more thing, older than any saying. A day her father had taken her by the shoulder to a crack in a limestone bank at noon, when the whole world baked, and made her lay her cheek against the shadowed stone. Does it breathe? He had asked her. She had felt it then. Cool air moving out of the dark, slow as a sleeping animal. Luz walked the wash at first light the next morning, and again at noon. In the cool of dawn, the stone told her nothing. At noon, it told her everything. The bare rock burned her palm through her glove. But one shaded crack at the deepest inside bend stayed cool, and when she held a scrap of wool against it, the wool bent inward, then drifted out. In and out. Breathing. She knelt and pried up a flat slab with the chisel. Under it lay rounded flood gravel, damp clay, and the pale threads of roots reaching down where no plant grew on the surface to own them. She struck the bedrock beside the slab, then struck the slab itself. The bedrock rang solid. The slab answered lower, hollow, like a knuckle on a full barrel. There's a room under it, Luz said. Hester looked at the black crack in the damp gravel and did not smile. Hollow ground makes a well, she said. It also makes a grave. You don't know which yet. No, Luz said. She drove the first stake into the damp clay. It went in farther than gravel had any right to let it. Not yet. They began to dig the next morning. Luz did not sink a straight pit. Her father had taught her that a wash is loose at the top and only firm below, that cemented cobble looks like rock until you undercut it and it comes down on your head. She opened a wide mouth first and stepped the walls inward as she went, a bench at every stride, so no wall stood tall enough to peel away and bury her. Jory Mellon rode down the second day to watch, because watching a girl waste her summer cost him nothing. A creek without water is only a grave with banks, he called down. You'll dig your own before September. Luz went on lowering gravel in a bucket to Hester at the surface. She did not look up. He wants an argument, Hester said, low, when the bucket came down empty. Give him a bucket count instead. That was Hester's whole method, and it became the method of everything that followed. She kept a ledger, not of feelings, of buckets, of depth, of the store debt, item by item, and the days of flour left, and the water Morrow drank. She held the purse, and she held the limits, and when Luz wanted to dig one more hour past dark, Hester decided whether the lamp oil could spare it. The store had already extended the tools of the trade against the debt. Ansel Pike had let them carry off rope, iron spikes, barrel hoops, lamp oil, flour, salt, 2 mesquite wedges, and a used block pulley, $18.45 in all, due the 15th of September. If it came unpaid, he took Morrow and Tomas's drilling tools, and he had said so plainly, the way a man says a thing he has decided not to feel bad about. You're spending my father's tools to look for water your father never proved was there, Luz had said in the store. I'm spending them, Ansel had answered, Because a dead man's debt doesn't die with him, and a live girl signed for it. So the clock ran while the shaft went down. 4 feet, 8, 12. Damp clay gave way to firmer gravel, and the gravel to the first true limestone. At 16 feet, the walls held cool. At 20, Luz worked in a light she carried down with her. Then she made her first mistake and paid for it, and told no lie about it. She was frightened of the flour running out before she reached the hollow, and fear made her narrow the shaft to save the labor of stepping it. She cut straight down beneath the shelf of cemented cobble, promising herself it would hold a few more days. It held until the middle of the night. A rain came that was too thin to wet the basin floor, but it found the loosened gravel at the shaft's lip, and near 2 in the morning the undercut sidewall let go. It came down in a slow, grinding rush that Luz heard from her bedroll and Hester heard from hers, and they both knew the sound before they were on their feet. By lamplight they saw the damage. Half the depth she had won was gone. Tomas's short shovel was buried somewhere under a ton of fallen cobble, and one of her timber sets with it. Luz went down on the rope to save the sounding line before more came, and the old rope burned across her left palm, the scar she had carried since she was 9, from a day helping her father haul a dropped drilling bucket, tore open along its length and bled into the glove. 3 working days lost. And the winter roof paper they had meant to buy, lost too, because Hester crossed it off the ledger and put the money toward more spikes and a fresh timber. "We could stop," Hester said, over the buried shaft, watching Luz wind cloth around her palm. "There's no shame in it. Carry laundry. Winter comes either way." Luz looked at the fall of cobble for a long time. "The gravel did what loose gravel does," she said. "I asked it to be rock. That was mine." She did not say it was bad luck. She did not say the rain was to blame. She widened the mouth again, wider than before, stepped every wall, and shored each 4-foot section with cribbing before she deepened the next, the way her father had shown her, and she had known and ignored. It cost her days she did not have. It did not cost her the shaft. Silas came in the night while the second attempt was still shallow. He did not come to the fire. In the morning, 2 lengths of sound pine timber lay at the head of the path, and beside them, as if to explain themselves, a few of Abel's discarded fence rails so that a person could believe the good timber had been thrown out too. Luz knew sound timber from thrown-away timber. She used it and said nothing, and she understood that Silas had signed the paper at the pine table and could not take his name back, but that he could leave wood in the dark. At 31 feet, the chisel struck limestone that rang true all the way around, and at the base of it, in one corner, a seam of dark rock exhaled cold air onto Luz's face. She widened the seam a hand at a time. Her father's second saying came back to her: "Never trust clear water until you know what stands above it." And so she shored the roof of the little opening before she reached through it. Then the sounding line went down into the dark, past her fingers, past a ledge, and touched water. She drew it up wet to more than 11 feet of its length. "There's water," she said up the shaft, and her voice cracked on it. The first bucket came up clear enough to hold the shape of the lamp flame on its surface, but a fine mineral cloud hung in it, and Luz's hand went to her mouth before she thought. "No," Hester said sharply from above. "You don't know what stands above that water. Neither do I. We settle it and we boil it and we drink it tomorrow if it's still sweet." They settled a cupful in a jar overnight. In the morning, the cloud had fallen to a pale skin at the bottom, and the water above ran clear. They boiled it anyway. It was cold, and it was good. Morrow drank a bucket of it and asked for a second. Luz did not celebrate. She marked the water level on the shaft wall with the chisel, a small notch, and wrote the date beside it in the notebook. because a discovery that no one measured was only a rumor, and rumors did not pay debts. By morning, the notch was wrong. The water stood higher than she had left it, and no one had poured anything in. "It fills itself," Hester said, staring at the two marks. "Slowly." Luz touched the higher line. "It fills itself back." "That's the whole thing, Hester." "That's what he saw. Not a puddle down there, a room the rock keeps filling." She should have stopped at that lesson. Measure. Wait. Learn the rate. Instead, the summer pushed her, and she made her second mistake in her haste to turn water into money before the debt came due. She needed somewhere to hold what she drew, and she built the fastest thing, an open wooden trough, knocked together in an afternoon and left uncovered in the sun. For 2 days it worked. On the third, the dust had filmed it, insects had found it, and a calf that had strayed down the wash had put its whole muzzle in and left the rest. The surface warmed and turned. By evening, the water in the trough carried a smell. Jory Mellon smelled it and rode the basin, telling everyone the underground water had come up rotten, that the Soria girl was selling sickness in a jar. Nalda Ortega, a widow with a small string of goats and a household well going bad, came down the path that same evening. She had meant to buy quietly, because her own water had begun to taste of mud. She stood at the trough and looked at it and said nothing, but her disappointment was plain. Luz looked at a full day's draw fouled in the trough. Then she tipped it out onto the gravel and let it run away. "Clear at the rope did not mean clean at the cup," she said. It was the nearest she came to cursing herself. She built again, and this time she built for the water and not for her hurry. She set 2 covered barrels in sequence, the first to catch and settle, the second to draw from clean, and a separate shaded stone trough downhill for the animals, so that no bucket that touched a beast's mouth would ever touch a person's. Over the shaft itself she laid a broad collar of dry stone, leaning slightly inward, and on top of it a timber deck with a close hatch that a lid could seal, a screened vent for the breathing air, and a hook for the drawing bucket so it never sat on the ground. She rebuilt the first crooked course of that collar 3 times before it sat true, hearing Cesario saying each time, "Stone holds only when water has somewhere else to go," until she understood that even a well collar had to let rain run off it, not pool and freeze and heave it apart. Nalda watched the whole handling, the settle, the cover, the boil, the 2 separated waters, and bought 2 covered jars and carried them up the path holding them the way Luz held them, level and shaded. "That's how you keep it clean," Luz told her. "Not the water, the handling." It was the first water she sold. It did not clear the debt. But it was honest, and Nalda came back. Then a freight driver came down from the stage road, hauling for a mining camp 2 days off, and he offered Luz more for 1 wagon of water than she owed Ansel Pike for the whole summer. She should have measured first. She sold. They filled his barrels through the afternoon, bucket after bucket up the windlass Luz had built by then, a timber frame, 2 bearing posts, an iron crank, a marked rope so Hester could count the draw by the knots. Hester counted. The number climbed higher than any day before, and the water in the shaft fell. By the driver's leaving, the surface stood 19 inches below Luz's noon mark. She looked down at it and felt the summer tilt under her. "It'll come back by morning," she told Hester. "It always comes back." It came back 8 inches. Luz sat at the shaft's edge in the dawn with the sounding line in her raw hand and understood that she had asked the room for more than the rock could refill in a night, and that if she had found only an old pocket with no true recharge, she had just spent it on 1 wagon and 1 payment. She refused the next 2 buyers who came that week. It cost her money she badly needed. It cost her a hard week of watching the level and waiting to learn what she owned. "The chamber had not promised what I promised for it," she said to Hester, and wrote it in the notebook so she would not forget it. Word of the wagon sale and of the falling water brought the surveyor. Edwin Harrow was a county man with mining and well work behind him, and he came down the path because Jory Mellon had ridden to the county seat, claiming the Soria girl was cheating buyers with talk of an endless underground lake. Harrow arrived expecting to catch a fraud. He brought his own line and his own patience. He drew a bucket and timed the fall. He drew again and marked the recovery through the night. He measured the shaft at close to 31 feet to the chamber's opening and dropped his sounding line from every ledge he could reach and did the arithmetic on the back of the estate map Luz still carried. "It isn't a lake," he said at last. "You couldn't drain the county with it, and you couldn't drain it in a season if you tried, but it isn't a lake. Anybody who tells the camp otherwise is lying." "I never called it a lake," Luz said. "No." Harrow tapped the two marks on the wall, the draw and the recovery. "You called it a chamber that fills itself. That's the truth of it. The rock above cracks all the way up, and the water comes down slow and steady and never stops, and this bowl holds it." He looked at her ledger. The bucket counts in Hester's square hand. "The chamber is not endless, but your measurements are honest. I don't often say that about a claim." He set the number with her, a working figure of perhaps 50,000 gallons at the spring high, and a safe daily draw far smaller than that, a draw she could take forever if she never took more than the rock returned. Together they marked a line on the staff gauge in red. Below the red, she sold nothing. Below the red, the water was for households and breeding stock, and no wagon at any price. Abel was on the rim that afternoon, come to see his fields, or so he told himself. He was close enough to hear the surveyor say, "Your measurements are honest," and close enough that Luz saw him there, and neither of them spoke of it. Abel turned his horse and rode back to Cottonwood Flat, where his corn stood green and his well ran, and where a straight new ditch he was proud of carried water fast off the top of his good dark soil. The last thing Luz built that spring, she built wrong, and the wash taught her the lesson her father's third saying had already tried to. She wanted to hold the storm water when it came, the visible water, the first of the two waters, and turn it into more for the chamber. So she laid a solid stone cross wall straight across a narrow of the wash, a wall meant to stop water and pond it. It looked strong. It looked like the right answer. It was the answer of a person who thought of water as a thing to be stopped. A modest thunderhead crossed the basin, dropped almost nothing on the valley, and sent a brown pulse down the wash sharper and faster than the small cloud seemed to promise. The pulse hit the cross wall and piled behind it. The water did not stop. It found the wall's weaker end, cut around it, and drove a fan of gravel straight toward the shaft collar. One of the settling barrels went over and burst its hoops. Luz stood in the drizzle and watched her wall defeat itself. She took the surviving section apart with her own hands the next morning. Harrow, still in the basin finishing his notes, walked the wash with her and put his boot on a spine of exposed bedrock that ran below the narrow. "You built a wall where the water wanted a road," he said. "I built a wall where the water needed a road," Luz answered, and it was the same sentence, and it was the truest thing she had said all summer. She built roads after that, low spreaders of brush and stone, angled gently across the shallow approaches to slow the gentle water and let it soak into the gravel and feed the room below. And following Harrow's bedrock spine, a deeper armored channel that took the hard water, the violent water when it came, and carried it fast on bare stone around the collar, away from everything that mattered. Slow the gentle water, give the hard water a road. She said it to herself until it was a saying too. Silas came again in the night to help move the heaviest stone for the bypass, and left again before the light, before Abel could see whose brother had bent his back on the worthless hill. Harrow rode out at the end of the week. Before he went, he looked once more at the whole of it: the shaft, the covered collar, the two settling barrels, the animal trough, the spreaders, the armored channel, the ledger open on the barrel head. "The first wall was wrong," he said. "The work after it is not." Then the rain stopped coming altogether, and the basin began to count. Hester started a fresh page and headed it with the date of the last true soaking, and after that she made a mark for every dry day. The marks marched down the page in rows. By the 20th day, the marks meant nothing yet to anyone but her. By the 40th, they had begun to mean something to everybody. Cottonwood Flat stayed green the longest because Abel pumped his well hard and plowed deep, and when the season turned dry, expanded his planting rather than shrinking it, on the reasoning that more corn in the ground was more corn to sell. His furrows ran straight down the slope of his good soil, fast and clean, the way a proud man likes a field to look. The shallow household wells of the basin began to taste of mud. Jory Mellon drove his cattle farther each morning to find standing water, and each morning it was farther still. Silas let one of his 2 fields die on purpose so the water would reach the other. Tonto Creek's side pools shrank to cracked mud rimmed with the tracks of everything that had come to drink and found nothing. Empty Cup's chamber fell too, but every night it climbed back nearly to where the day's draw had left it, and Luz drew only to her red line and no further, and her small test plot of tepary beans and squash, a crop her father had said the old people grew because it asked the desert for almost nothing, held its leaves green while the valley's tall corn began, at the edges, to curl. The gossip changed. Luz heard it change through Nalda and through Hester's trips to the store. First, it had been how long before the girl's hole caves in on her. Then, as the wells failed, how much water is under that creek. Then, when the freight drivers came asking and Luz turned them away below the red line, why in God's name is she refusing money for it? That third question was the one that meant she had won something, though she did not say so, and did not feel it as winning. Nalda came down the path near the 70th dry day, not to buy, but to learn. She stood over Hester's ledger, the bucket counts, the barrel deposits, the red line on the gauge, the little column of water given away without charge to households whose wells had failed, and she read it the way another woman might read scripture. "You could sell every drop of what you give away," Nalda said. "She could," Hester answered, "and when the drought broke, no one in this basin would ever buy from her again, and they'd be right not to." Nalda went home and covered her own storage jars and moved her goat pen downhill and away from her failing well, and cut a marked stick to measure what water she had left, because Luz had shown her that a thing you cannot measure is a thing you cannot ration. She was the first to copy the method instead of buying the water. She would not be the last. The drought had not emptied the chamber. It had measured the people drawing from it. On the 82nd dry night, a man came down the footpath in the dark and stopped at the foot of the collar where the lamp did not reach, and stood there a while before he found his voice. It was Abel. He did not ask for his herd. He asked for water enough to keep 2 milk cows alive and enough for his youngest daughter's child, who was 3 days into a fever and could not keep down the mud-tasting water from the family well. Hester looked at the gauge. The red line was close. Commercial sales had already stopped. What stood above the red was the winter's roof money and the last margin against a bad autumn. Luz drew the water and gave it to him. Hester, at the ledger, drew a line through the words "war roof paper" and wrote in the column of water given away the date and the amount. Kindness had just cost them a dry bed when the winter rain finally came, and she wrote it down so that no one, least of all Luz, could ever pretend it had come free. Abel took the water without meeting Luz's eyes and went up the path the way he had come. Before dawn, he brought the empty barrels back. He did not knock. Beside them, set down carefully in the gray light, he left one broad slab of limestone, squared and flat, shaped as well for the top course of a collar as anything Luz had ever quarried herself. Luz found it at first light. She did not ask who had brought it. She already knew. She did not touch it either. She left it where it lay and went to draw the morning's water and marked the level and found it holding just above the red. Edwin Harrow had come back through the basin that week on other business, and he stood with Luz that evening looking north at the high country, at the cinderback country where the storms came from, where a bruise of cloud had begun to gather over the rim after so many weeks of hard, clean sky. "You've done everything a person can do for a dry season," Harrow said, "but that's not the season I'd worry over now." He nodded at the far cloud. "A storm after a drought is the dangerous one. The ground's baked hard as your collar. It won't drink. It'll shed every drop straight down the washes." He was quiet a moment. No wall gets to be certain before the storm. Beyond the ridge, low and far, the first thunder of the summer rolled once and stopped. Above Empty Cup the sky stayed clear, and Abel's squared stone lay untouched at the foot of the collar, waiting for a hand to set it. The chamber's water climbed only to a finger's width below the red line now, and it climbed slower each night. Luz drew for households first and asked no payment. The rest she held. When Jory Mellon came down the path leading a string of thirsty cattle and offered double for a full trough, she gave him water for his breeding stock and his saddle horses and not one bucket for the rest of the herd. "You'd let good cattle die for a line drawn in chalk," Jory said. "I'd let the chamber live," Luz said. "Dead cattle sell for hides. A dead chamber sells for nothing and takes the basin with it." Jory drove his herd on toward the county water at a loss he would remember, and he cursed her the length of the path, and she let him. Hester watched him go and turned to a clean column in the ledger and wrote what the herd water would have brought and what the breeding water had brought instead, so the cost of the choice would stand in ink beside the choice. "You're the least popular water in 3 counties, Hester said. "I know it." "You could plant the low bench now. You've earned the seed. You could take the mining contract Harrow turned down for you. You could buy a proper pump on credit against next year's water." Luz shook her head at every one of them. "Every new promise drinks before the bucket reaches the surface," she said. Instead of spreading out, she went down. She strengthened. She recut the armored channel a hand deeper along the bedrock, mortared the collar's weakest joint, moved the clean barrels to higher ground, and coiled fresh rope at the shaft head where a person could reach it in the dark. Abel's shallow well had begun to give mud before it gave water. Luz heard it from Nalda, who heard it from Abel's wife, that Abel pumped it dry every morning now and waited for it to seep back brown, and that the corn on Cottonwood Flat, the expanded acres he had been so proud of, had begun to curl from the outside rows in. Abel came down twice more in the dark for household water, and twice more Luz gave it, and once, from the rim in daylight, she saw him pacing the length of her armored bypass, stepping it off boot to boot, counting something to himself. He did not know she watched. He measured her hard water road the way a man measures a thing he means to argue with, or a thing he has begun to believe. Nalda took to organizing the households now, a time for each family to come and draw, a jar apiece, so there was no crowding at the collar and no waste. She kept her own small ledger in a hand that grew surer each week. When Hester had to freight a load to the stage road, Nalda kept the counts and kept them right. A rider came through the basin near the 90th dry day with news off the rim. A cloudburst had stood over the cinderback country for the better part of an hour, he said, and the high draws were running, and the color of the runoff was the color of stripped ground. Harrow rode down that same afternoon. He did not dismount. "It's coming off the high country whether it rains on us or not," he told Luz. "Could be tonight, could be 3 days. When it comes down these washes, it'll come as a wall, and it'll come before you feel a drop here. Get your tools up. Get anything you love off the wash floor." Luz cleared the bypass mouth of the brush that had blown into it. She lowered a hand axe and a coil of rope on separate lines and lashed them where a person standing in the channel could reach them. Hester sealed the hatch, weighted it, and carried the clean barrels to the high bench above the flood line. Silas, when the word reached him, went out and reinforced the turn of his ditch with sacks of gravel and abandoned any pretense he was not helping. Abel did the opposite. Abel took the news of coming water and cut a straight trench, deep and clean, from the upper edge of Cottonwood Flat down to the main wash, so the flood, when it came, would run off his good soil fast and leave his corn standing. It was the same instinct that made his furrows run straight downhill. Move the water, move it fast, move it by the shortest road. Luz walked up to the flat when she saw what he was digging. "That trench points at your own lower field," she said, "and your barn, and the well. You're not sending the water away, you're aiming it." Abel leaned on his shovel. He did not look at her, which she had come to know was not contempt, but the nearest thing he had to shame. "Water has to go somewhere," he said. "Shortest road's the fastest empty." "The shortest road for hard water is the deepest cut it can make," Luz said. "You'll have a canyon where you've got a trench. You send yours around the long way and lose half your ground to a stone ditch that grows nothing." He drove the shovel in. "I'll not run my whole farm the way a girl runs a rock pile." Luz did not say it again. Her father's saying stood between them unspoken. A hidden mistake still belongs to the builder. And she left him to his straight, clean, fatal trench and went back down to the wash. The first gust came off the north with the smell of rain in it, rain that was falling somewhere she could not see. Above Empty Cup, the sky was going the color of an old bruise, but not a drop had fallen. Then, in the dry bed at her feet, small pebbles began to move. They rolled and ticked and gathered, pushed by nothing she could see, and she knew that meant the water was already coming underground through the gravel ahead of the wall, the way her father had said it would, the first of the two waters announcing the second. "Up," Luz called to Hester. "Up on the bench, now." The brown line came around the bend low and almost gentle, no higher than a boot. Then the ground behind it caught up, and the low line stood up into a moving wall of water the color of the hills, carrying brush and a fence rail and the bloated shape of something that had drowned upstream, and it came down the wash with a sound like a train and a smell like turned earth. It hit the first spreader. The low-angled ribs of brush and stone caught the front of it, dragged at it, spread it wide and thin across the shallow approach, and for one moment the whole flood staggered and lost its edge. Then it filled the spreader and came on, but it came on slower and lower and broken. The second spreader took the broken water and bent under it. Luz saw the stone shudder, saw one rib begin to go, and then the armored channel took the main weight of the flood, and the second spreader held what was left. The hard water found its road. It roared down the bedrock spine on bare stone, fast and ugly, and going exactly where she had built it to go, around the collar, past the barrels, away. She had almost let herself believe it would hold clean when the mesquite came down the wash. A whole tree, roots and all, torn out of some bank upstream, turning slow in the current. It struck the mouth of the bypass sideways and wedged, and behind it, in a breath, a mat of brush began to pack, and the flood that had been finding its road began, instead, to pool and rise and lean toward the collar. "It'll top the channel," Luz shouted over the water. "It'll come at the shaft." She took the rope off the shaft head, tied it around her waist with a knot her father had drilled into her hands, and looped the standing end twice around the collar's heaviest stone. Then she went down onto the wet ledge above the bypass with the hand axe to cut the brush mat loose before the wedged mesquite turned the whole flood onto everything she had built. "Luz!" Hester was at the collar, both hands on the rope. "Hold what I give you," Luz said, and went down. She cut into the brush mat where it packed against the trunk. It came loose in wet slabs, and each slab that tore free let a gout of the pooled water find the channel again and run off harmless down the road she had made for it. She was winning it. 3 more cuts and the mesquite would float clear. The trunk shifted. The freed water moved it before she felt it move, rolled it a quarter turn, and the root ball swung and struck the ledge under her feet and knocked her flat. And then the water that had been pooling came through all at once and took her off the stone and into the bypass channel with it. The rope went tight. It caught her hard under the ribs and swung her against the far bank, and the water climbed over her and tried to pull the knot her father had taught her, and could not. At the collar, the heaviest stone began to drag toward the channel with her weight and the water's weight on the rope together. Hester had it and could not hold it and would not let go. Silas reached them then. He had come down the moment the rider passed his place, and he took the rope off the dragging stone and wrapped it once around his own body, and once around Morrow's saddle horn where the mare stood trembling at the head of the path, and he leaned back into it. Abel came behind him. Abel, who had left his straight trench to the flood and run for the wash, and set his hands on the rope behind Silas and his boots in the gravel, and pulled. The 2 brothers and the mare and the widow drew Luz up out of the bypass hand over hand against the water's whole weight, and laid her on the wet stone of the bench, coughing brown water, alive. The second spreader failed while they knelt over her. It let go all at once and washed down the channel in pieces. It had done its work. It had held long enough. The mesquite, freed of Luz's weight, and the pooling water both, finally rolled clear of the bypass mouth and went on down the wash, and the flood found its road again and took it, roaring past the collar on the bare bedrock, around and away. The timber hatch stayed shut. The armored channel carried the killing water past the shaft in the dark. Up on Cottonwood Flat, Abel's straight trench filled and cut deeper, until it was not a trench, but a raw gully 10 feet wide, and it took the topsoil off the lower field in sheets, and drove a flood of mud into the shallow well, and filled it to the lip with ruin. By full dark, the flood had passed. The wash ran a shrinking brown thread where an hour before there had been a wall. No one yet knew whether the flood had reached the hidden chamber or fouled it, or whether the summer's whole labor lay poisoned under the closed hatch. At first light they read what the water had written. Hester would not let anyone open the hatch until she had walked the whole collar on her knees, feeling every joint. It had shifted less than the width of Harrow's smallest measuring mark. She opened it then, and Luz drew the first bucket, and it came up brown and cloudy. "No," Luz said, and poured it back down the shaft. "Not for drinking. Not until it settles and runs clear, and I've watched it a day." The shaft itself stood plumb and whole. The chamber below had risen. She could hear the difference in the sounding lines fall, but the flood water that reached it had come slowed and filtered through gravel, not straight off the top of the ground, and by the second day the draw ran clear again and settled sweet. Then they walked the basin, Luz and Hester and Harrow, and later Nalda with her paper and pencil, and they measured what the night had done. Cottonwood Flat had lost its topsoil in long tongues where the water had run, 4 and 5 inches of good dark loam gone down the wash to somewhere it would never be soil again. Abel's straight trench had become a gully a man could stand in. The shallow well was full to the brim with mud. The expanded corn lay flat, roots in the air. At Empty Cup, the sacrificial gravel trap Luz had dug above the collar held nearly a foot of stone and debris the flood had dropped when the spreaders slowed it. Inside her small planting pockets, where the tepary beans still stood, lay a thin, fresh skin of fine silt the gentle water had laid down. New soil, given, not taken. The chamber stood higher than it had all summer. One spreader was gone. One barrel was staved in. The collar had not moved. Harrow ran his line along the collar and along the gully both, and wrote the 2 numbers in his book, and looked at them a while. "No one's going to argue these," he said. "Nature already has." Jory Mellon came down that morning to see the creek that had eaten his mockery all summer. He stood at the trap full of caught gravel and the collar standing plumb and the little pockets gaining soil, and he took his hat off, not to Luz, but to the work. "She never tried to hold the whole flood," Jory said, "to no one, to everyone. She gave the hard water a road and broke the rest on those low ribs. That's the whole of it." He turned the hat in his hands. "I called it a grave with banks. I was looking at the banks." Nalda wrote each measurement down in her sure new hand. Then she said the thing that was truest of all of them. "Water can fail a household once. A household should not let it fail twice." Abel came last. He came down the path near noon with mud dried to his knees and a shovel over his shoulder, and he stood at the foot of the collar where his squared stone still lay untouched in the gravel where he had left it in the dark weeks before. He looked at the trap full of debris and the road of bare stone the flood had run down and gone, and the shaft standing whole. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say the trench had been a fool's work, though it had cost him his lower field and his well and half his corn, and everyone standing there knew it. He looked at the armored channel a long moment. Then he asked the only question he had come to ask. "Where do you send the hard water?" Luz did not answer with victory. She did not answer with words at all at first. She walked to the exposed bedrock spine where the channel ran and put her hand flat on the stone, and Abel came and stood beside her and looked where she looked. Then she went to the survey shed and brought out her father's stone hammer, the narrow one wrapped in oiled cloth, and she put it in Abel's hands. "You send it down bare rock," she said, "where it can't cut, and you slow the gentle water before it so the ground can drink. You don't stop water. You tell it where to go." Abel closed his hand around the hammer's worn handle. It had been Thomas's, and before that it had likely been the Sonoran's, and now it was in the hand of the man who had given Thomas's daughter a dry creek and kept the well. He carried the first stone up from the wash himself. They rebuilt through the back of the summer, the 4 of them, and then the whole basin. Abel carried stone and learned at 42 from a girl of 16 how a stone was set. Silas carried 2, and when he lifted a flat slab to the new spreader, he asked which way it went. "Which face turns uphill?" Silas said. "The one that doesn't invite the water underneath," Luz said, and showed him with her hands, and he turned the stone and set it, and it held. Nalda's 2 sons cleared the debris trap. Jory Mellon hauled down a wagon of fence timber for a new hatch cover and would not take pay for it. Harrow marked the red line fresh on the staff gauge and taught Abel to read it, and Abel read it, and understood at last what the line meant, and why the girl had turned wagons away all summer to keep the water above it. Next season? Abel said once, not looking up from the stone he was setting, I won't cut another straight trench down that field. It was the nearest thing to an apology he ever spoke, and it was about the next season's work, not the last season's wrong, and it was enough. Ansel Pike came down on the 14th of September with his ledger. He had heard the basin talk, and he had come to see the books himself before he took a mare and a dead man's tools off a live girl on the 15th. Hester laid the ledger open on the barrel head. Every bucket, every sail, every jar of household water given free through the drought, the whole column of it, dated and totaled. Near $9 of water that could have cleared the debt twice over, handed away instead to families whose wells had failed. Ansel read it down to the bottom. He was quiet a while. You could have paid me in July, he said. If you'd sold what you gave away, you'd have paid me in July and had money left. She'd have had money, Hester said, and the basin would have had corpses. Luz counted out $31.20 in water receipts and paid the $18.45, and Ansel wrote it settled. Then he drew his pencil through the interest and drew it through the collateral clause that had put Morrow and the tools at risk, and he closed the book. The tools stay yours, he said. A person who gives away water in a drought will pay a debt in a flood. I should have known it in June. Abel came to Luz at the end of that week and offered, without being asked, permanent wagon access across Cottonwood Flat and the restoring of her share in the old family road. She took that. She had asked for it once at a pine table and been refused, and now it was given, and she took it. He offered the cabin deed, too, the cabin where her mother had lived and her father had died, that Abel had taken in the sale. Luz looked at it a long time. Then she signed it over to Hester, because Hester had held the girl's $3 and the girl's anger both all summer and asked for nothing. Some weeks later, Hester found the $3 silver folded into the pocket of Luz's notebook, the exact 3 she had laid on the pine table in the spring. No one had said a word. Abel had put them there. The basin made a cooperative of it before the autumn was out. Households first, breeding stock second, commercial sale last, and never below the red. Nalda kept the ledger when Hester was away, and kept it right. Months on, a second-hand wind pump turned slow above the covered shaft, bought with honest earnings after the crisis, and not before. And it lifted the water Luz still measured every morning and rationed every day. The chamber did not water the whole basin. It never had, and it never would. It kept the households and a modest crop, and a managed few animals, and it kept them because Luz never once asked it for more than the rock returned in the night. Luz Soria became, in time, the most solvent independent waterholder in the district. Not because the water was endless, but because she had proven, in front of a surveyor, in a drought and a flood, exactly how much it was, and had never sold a drop she could not replace. She bought the upland above the wash to protect the cracks that fed the chamber. She kept her father's tools. Empty Cup Wash had never grown richer than Cottonwood Flat. It never made a single drop of water. It only held what the rock offered, long enough for the living things around it to use, and it turned the hard water aside instead of trying to own it. The drought had proved that good soil and a full well could still die of thirst. The flood had proved that 4 inches of the best loam in the basin could go down a straight trench in a single night. Empty Cup endured for another reason. Every stone in it had been given a purpose and a place, and when the water finally came down off the high country to judge the summer's work, purpose held where pride had washed away. Pip, the yellow dog, slept with his back against the first course of Collarstone, the one Luz had rebuilt after the slump, in the cool, the stone kept even at noon. Abel carried another flat stone up from the wash and stood with it and asked Luz where it belonged. She turned it once in her hands to put the true face against the weather and set it in his. They had called it worthless because nothing ran across the top of it. It endured because a girl learned what moved beneath it and because she never asked it to give everything it held.